Hello everyone and welcome back to another Batman Miniature Game 3rd Edition Battle Report, and finally we can bring you the Mr. Freeze crew, the 3rd Edition models with 3rd Edition rules and the 3rd Edition objective deck. Now, as of filming, the cards are still not available in a printable fashion on the Night Models website. We're doing this totally kind of ghetto strat to be able to do this now, in that on a monitor next to the table we have Tabletop Simulator running, which has the Mr. Freeze miniatures in there with the cards. Going to be tracking their stats via that. That's just what we're going to be doing. So we'll talk more about the Freeze crew specifics, but this is the table we'll be playing on, and the Mr. Freeze crew will be going up against the Batman crew today. Simple as, a crew we've seen before in fact. So with that, let's get into it. So here is the 350 rep crew for Mr. Freeze. The Heart of Ice, Cold of Ice, whatever the crew box was called, minus Killer Frost and with the new Mr. Freeze inserted. Instead they're the same points, so they're utterly, completely interchangeable. But he is joined by Ranged Polar Bear, that's what his name is, Close Combat Polar Bear, and then Freeze Thugs, which is hard to say, Freeze Thugs. 1 through 4 from left to right. 1, 2, 3 and 4. In terms of upgrades, the one with the cryo cannon here has a cool generator which gives him the stop roll, and the two close combat focused ones, the lady here with the power fist and him with his ice sword, they have been given the cryo grenade upgrade, which gives them a special action cryo grenade, which Mr. Freeze has by default, lets them spread cold to enemies, and more importantly freeze suspect markers, which is connected to this special shenanigans this crew has. So we'll quickly go over those just because it is new to the table. So the first new mechanic is Frozen. When an enemy model is targeted by the Ice Flash trait, any suspects within 2 inches of them become frozen. Models with the Cold Acclimation trait performing a reveal action on a frozen suspect marker, without the Cold Acclimation trait, all of these models have it, have to spend an additional action. So you can't just use the manipulate, you'd have to use like a manipulate and a special, for instance, to reveal a frozen suspect marker. And you start with 4 Ice Age cards. They do not contribute to your 20 card objective deck. Speaking of which, it's a pure Mr. Freeze deck, just missing the Killer Frost card because she's not here. And it does also note that there are other ways to freeze suspect markers besides using Ice Flash. So we have these Ice Age cards, 4 of them. And here's how they work really quick. When a friendly model performs an action that makes at least one suspect marker within 4 inches of an enemy model become frozen, the opponent places a random card from their objective hand face up with this card on top of it. They can't use it. And the way they get the card back, other than there's an objective card they can score which has this removed from the game in order to score it. If a frozen suspect marker is revealed, which again costs 2 actions if you're not cold acclimated, you get the objective card back, but you also get the Ice Age card back. The objective card that scores with those takes the Ice Age card out the game entirely, which is worth mentioning. So I think that about covers it. In terms of just general rules across the crew, just to get out of the way, Mr. Freeze has Cryo Armor 2, everybody else has Cryo Armor 1. It reduces attack dice used against them by the number, so 1 for everybody except Mr. Freeze, but also gives that many free efforts if they're within 4 inches of a frozen suspect marker. That can be a friendly one or an enemy one, just frozen in general. I think that about covers it, other than any specifics we'll cover as they fight. Looking forward to seeing how they do with their pure objective deck. It's a little complicated, hopefully get most things right, let's see. And here's the Batman crew that we're going to be using today. Again, they have been on the channel before. It's the 100% pure Dark Knight Returns Frank Miller themed list with all the miniatures from that range. So we have the Frank Miller Batman wearing his Power Armor upgrade, the Carrie Kelly Robin, and normally a leader but can be brought as a sidekick in this crew. If you have the Frank Miller Batman, we have the Dark Knight Returns Green Arrow, and then we have the Sons of Batman 1, 2 and 3. Upgrades wise, Batman's got the upgraded Batsuit for that +1 health. The one with the shotgun, which I believe is Son of Batman 2, he's got patrol training to give him undercover, so he'll be deploying out of deployment zone. Both of these have handcuffs. He has a grapple gun, and he has... ooh, I've forgotten. Nope, can't remember offhand. He's got one other upgrade. If it becomes relevant, we'll mention it. So here we are at deployment. The upgrade I forgot to mention was a radio. I also forgot to mention that Green Arrow has a reinforced gloves upgrade as well. So both crews are deployed. The Batman crew is on your left, Mr. Freeze crew is on your right. The Mr. Freeze crew has first activation and a numbers advantage. So if we just take a look at how they've deployed, we've got, that's Thug 2 and 4 I believe, and then we have Thug 1, and the ranged polar bear, close combat polar bear, Mr. Freeze himself, and then the other thug next to him, and you can see who has Audacity right there. Then over here we've got two sons of Batman down here in the corner, Batman himself, Green Arrow, Carrie Kelly, Robin over there with Audacity, and the one with patrol training to do undercover didn't go that far forwards from the deployment zone, but deployed kind of in this cover here with eyes on in this area. There is no objective cards being played in Phase 1 or Phase 2, so we are just jumping straight into the game. Let's see how this goes. So to get the game started, Mr. Freeze went with the Power Fist wielding henchwoman, either way. She moved forwards not that far, she has 8 inches, most of the crew is actually kind of slow, that's their thing. They don't have great defense, most of their defenses are just 3 and cryo armor is kind of to balance that out, and they're a little slow, besides the polar bears. But anyway, she moved up, she put down a suspect marker, which you'll see has a marker on it, we'll talk about that in a second, and she played an objective card on putting that down. So, we can go over the first of Mr. Freeze's cards. A freeze is coming, hopefully going to be in focus. When placing a friendly suspect marker, roll 1d3 plus 3. She rolled a 2, which is a 1, so hence the 2 on it. Place a numeric counter value on it. Reduce the value by 1 at the end of each subsequent friendly model's activation. Most of these counter cards for other crews are any activation after the one you're currently on. This card is only friendlies. When it hits 0, you score it for a massive 3. So it is a really, really potent card trying to force/encourage the opponent to get rid of your suspect markers. But on that note, for her special action, she used her cryo grenade upgrade, and this here I'm using the old 2nd edition Mr. Freeze markers to denote a suspect marker which is frozen. And the reason to do that, despite the fact that there's no enemies nearby, is that 1, provides a bonus to cryo armor, 2, it makes the marker harder to remove. So for instance, if Batman wanted to kick in his grapple gun to have enough, he doesn't have enough movement, but pretend he did because he's not a slow Batman. Grapple gun, he couldn't do that because when he got over there, all he'd have left is a tactical action. You'd need a tactical plus a special because it's a frozen suspect marker. It's a very potent strategy. So 2 more friendly activations, that'll count down and score. The suspect marker stays frozen until such time as it is removed. Carrie Kelly got the game started for the Batman crew, and she's a fast little so-and-so, but opted not to come that far out of deployment, just enough that she could put down a suspect marker and make it a snitch. She also used concealment as her special action, so that's the same as on Gentleman Ghost. She can only be seen if in base to base, which is really, really potent for keeping her safe. So anyway, we've seen the snitch card before, it is also in play. The close combat focused polar bear was next up for the Freeze crew without Audacity, but they are henchmen and he was next to Mr. Freeze, so he has a free manipulated inspire, or an inspire related manipulate, whatever way you want to say that. 8 default movement, but he is an animal for that extra bit of movement there, but he wanted to stop there for cover from the shotgun son of Batman over there. He put down his suspect marker. Now, unrelated to everything he did in his turn though, when the activation started, Kingdom of Ice was played. So this is one you just put into play until such time as it scores. Play this card at the start of an activation when a model suffers the freeze effect or damage from a weapon with the cold trait. I think almost literally every weapon in this crew has cold on it. I think the only exception might be the close combat attack of the ranged polar bear, I think. Either way. Whenever your model is afflicted by freeze or someone gets hit by a weapon with the cold trait, place a blood marker on this card. When there's 5, you score it, but it does stipulate, unlike the Court of Owl card that's similar to this, you can only have 1 in play at a time. So the Batman crew decided to use their one and only pass because they have 6 miniatures to the Freeze crew's 7, so it was back over to them, and the one with the cryo cannon and the cool generator upgrade activated without Audacity. He was next to Mr. Freeze. He walked up with the close combat polar bear and also put down his suspect marker. With his activation, the A Freeze is Coming card has scored because that suspect marker over there was unmolested, so that is the first card actually scored 3 points for the Freeze crew. Son of Batman 3 was activated right on the table edge over here, within 8 of his boss though for that Inspire Manipulate, which he used after moving forwards. He didn't move his full 8 inches, but far enough that he's placed down a suspect marker. The car is kind of providing a little bit of cover potentially. He should be relatively safe there. Freeze Thug 4 activated, that's the one with the ice sword. He hopped the little banister there, didn't suffer impaired movement because it's much lower than he is, and stopped at the car that's always 8 inches would allow, but that does make him able to throw for a special action his cryo grenade at the Son of Batman and the suspect marker he put down, and it froze the suspect marker, It did cold on him for -2 movement. Doesn't do any damage though, so it doesn't count towards Kingdom of Ice in any way. But after doing that, he could play Important Research. Play during a friendly model's activation at the end of the next enemy activation, so the turn we're about to go into. If the opponent has at least one Ice Age card in play, remove that card from play and score this card for a massive 3. And because a suspect marker was frozen within 4 inches of an enemy model, that does mean that an Ice Age card has kicked in. Randomly selected card from the Batman hand, back to Arkham, is currently frozen in ice. Although at the end of the next turn, it's going to be immediately back in hand, but at the cost of 3 victory points for the Freeze crew. Son of Batman 1 came out of deployment just by 2 inches, enough to put down a suspect marker there, and outside of 4 of the frozen one there. He then threw Batarangs out of optimal range because they're short range, so he was losing a die for that at the Freeze Thug 4 here, losing another die because of Cryo Armor, so it just resulted in him rolling 1 normal die. It did get through though, for 2 stun. However, Important Research scores because that suspect marker was not removed. So what happens when that occurs, in the same sort of way as when a Ice Age card is solved by removing a frozen suspect marker, the card is freed and is put on the top of the objective pile, so that's the forced next draw for the Batman crew. Normally the Ice Age card just goes back into hand to use again, but when you're scoring Important Research, it is removed from the game entirely. So now Mr. Freeze only has 3 of them. But he scored 3 victory points. So it was time for the man himself, Mr. Freeze, to activate, although he didn't do too much in this battle round. He's scientific, so he can do 2 special actions if he chooses to, although there wasn't the opportunity here. He's got Scheming 2 to move suspect markers at the end of a turn, and he moves slow. He moves 8. So he waddled up here, and then from there he threw his Cryo Grenade at the suspect marker here just to freeze it. Provides a little bit of a free effort buff for everyone nearby, and he's positioned himself as such so that he can help out with free manipulates as well. No one in range really. He's got medium range. I forgot to mention when going over kind of like general rules for the Freeze crew, but all the ranged weapons have a rule called Exposure, which means after the first initial hit that gets through, any subsequent hits generate 1 extra damage. So potentially there's a lot of damage possible as long as you get in at least a couple of hits that would turn into 3 hits. 3 hits would turn into 5, and so on. So it's nasty if enough hits get through. Green Arrow activated and made use of his grapple gun to fire himself, not too far honestly, just over into this little bit of terrain here. He put down a suspect marker for his tactical action because he can't move and fire, particularly because of the way bows work in this game, which needs changing in 3rd edition desperately. Either way though, that's all he's doing this turn. So the Freeze Thug thought it was a good idea for some reason to replace both her arms with guns, activated without Audacity, but thanks to Mr. Freeze moving there, she is in his Inspire range, and that was important, that's why he moved there. So she moved forward to her 8, so she's even with the sword guy here, put down his suspect marker, and that is within 4 of that frozen suspect marker there, which scores a Stay Cool. A friendly model places a frozen suspect within 4, not wholly within, of an enemy frozen suspect marker, so that has scored for 2. Second last activation for the turn was the Batman. Well, second last activation for their crew anyway. He used a power counter from his power armor to give himself 4 inches, which is really extra 2 inches because wearing the power armor takes off 2 of his already 8-inch slow movement. But either way, that was enough for him to move 10 up to where you can see him. He then used his expansive Sonic Blaster on the Polar Bear, and that created the issue again of how do expansive and template weapons work when you're supposed to lose dice, because it doesn't have a rate of fire, it has how many templates to use. If I remember rightly, the consensus solution is that the strength die you would roll becomes the normal die against their defense, as opposed to being the strength die for mechanical, firearm, whatever. I believe that's what it was suggested was the solution, so that's what's been done here, because otherwise he wouldn't be able to hurt him at all, because he'd lose the 1 die he rolls against the cryo armor. So it did 2 stun. It's fairly irrelevant anyway because, well, 1, it didn't score anything, and 2, both polar bears are desensitized, so that even though they've got rubbish willpower of 5, they can't be knocked out. So last activation for the Freeze crew in Battle Round 1 was the ranged polar bear, who did eventually move into base-to-base contact with that Surgrain. Before he moved though, he used his Barrage special abilities, which lets him target anyone within range, regardless of line of sight or cover. The penalty is you lose an attack die, and you lose -1 to your attack rolls. So he has Devastating on his cryo launching barrage, whatever it's called, along with, it's Cold, Devastating, Mechanical, Exposure, And I think it has something else. Oh, crit freeze maybe. Either way, the important part is devastating, so you're rolling 2 strength die, but he's losing one of those to the barrage roll. He fired down here into the Son of Batman. Now, lucky for the Son of Batman, only the strength die, the extra one, got through. The other two did not, thanks to the penalty to using barrage. So he got lucky, but one hit from that gun does 2 blood, 2 stun. If 2 hits had landed, it wouldn't be 4 blood, 4 stun, because it would be the extra hit from exposure as well. So you could either make that stun or blood to add on 1 extra there as well. That could be a potentially devastating weapon. Ideally you want to fire it without having to use barrage, so then you don't lose the die or the minuses, but yeah, it's a scary weapon. Last activation for the turn was the final Son of Batman, thankfully close enough to the man himself for that free inspire, because he moved up and a little bit suicidal. He's facing down the polar bear, but he revealed the suspect marker that had been placed there a while back. It was not one of the frozen ones, so he didn't need another action, and in doing so put the Batman crew on the board with comb through everything. So at the end of battle round 1, everyone who has taken stun damage has healed 1. Forgot to mention as well, but with the Son of Batman who got hit by the barrage from the polar bear down there getting hit and it having the cold status, I think that's him at -4 movement for 1, but 2, that does put a point on Kingdom of Ice, which stays in play. The snitch for Batman is scoring because Carrie Kelly's placed marker right at the top left of your screen there didn't get harassed at all, so that's scored for 3. And the Batman crew is also playing. Perhaps you would have guessed this is coming based on placements. Secure the perimeter. Remove 2 friendly suspect markers within 2 of the board edge. This one and this one. Now this is removing a frozen one. Not sure what that would mean if Mr. Freeze had any cards that trigger on that happening. Presumably they would trigger. In this case it doesn't matter because of what's in his hand. But that scores for 2. And with that we can go into battle round 2. So here we are at the top of turn 2, and it will be the Batman crew taking first activation unless they choose to pass. Have to quickly cover though in the raise to plan phase also, that is when Mr. Freeze can use his scheming. This suspect marker has been moved 4, and the one that was previously a snitch has also been moved 4. There is one phase 1 card being played by the Batman crew. It's their Die Hard, and it's being played on Carrie Kelly, because she's relatively safe up there. And there is one phase 2 card being played. It's Frozen Assets, which we saw during that Suicide Squad game recently. So it's essentially a 1-turn loot. You put it in base-to-base contact with a friendly suspect marker, and if someone's there, presumably they're instantly picking it up. So the lady with the power fist is holding loot for the turn. It would also help if I showed who had Audacity. The heavily reduced movement speed Son of Batman, Green Arrow, Batman himself, Carrie Kelly for the Batman crew, Power Fist Lady, Close Combat Polar Bear, Mr. Freeze, and Thug 4 are the ones for the Freeze crew. So to get Battle Round 2 started for the Batman crew, it was the overly brave Son of Batman with the sawn-off shotgun there who activated. He actually has a pistol as well, and that's what he used. So he lost a die to Cryo Armor, but he fired the other 2, and of the 2 hits, 1 got through. It would do blood stun, however it is all converted to stun in order to score a non-lethal ammo card, most likely just before he gets murderized. So sure enough, Mr. Close Range Attack Polar Bear decided to activate. First special action used Unstoppable, which is just overkill really. That's the 2 blocks required for each hit that gets through. The Son of Batman is defense 2. Now that said, going all in, no efforts on either side. 4 hits, he's got Blood Stun Cryo Claws. So 4 blood, 4 stun, doesn't actually kill him, he's got 5 health. Does knock him out though. And also that does put 1 more pip on Kingdom of Ice because he had cold attached. And during the Polar Bear's turn, Endless Winter is being put into play. Play this card at the start of an activation. When an enemy suspect marker becomes frozen during a friendly model's action, put a stun marker on this, and once there's 3 on this, you score it for 2. So it's very similar to Kingdom of Ice, except instead of doing damage with cold weapons or doing the freeze effect, this is specifically for freezing enemy suspect markers. So, and there can only be 1 in play of this card at a time, so it's in play as well. Frank Miller Batman activated next and opted to use his grapple gun. He did not use it in the first turn, he used the power armor movement buff. Still only gives him 12 in total once you take into account negatives from being in power armor. That was just enough, like literally just enough, to zoom over here by the car into base to base with the suspect marker that was there. It wasn't frozen, and he revealed it in order to score a comb through everything, so he's just going for the points. Now, along with that, once he got over there, as a resource, he played Tonight We Are the Law. All friendly models with the Dark Knight Returns trait, which everyone in this crew has, Within 8 of the active model, heals 1 damage. It's not a big thing, but this Son of Batman now only has 1 blood damage on him. Mr. Freeze activated and moved up to the car here. He threw his cryo grenade at the enemy suspect marker there and froze it. No one within 4 though, so no Ice Age card. Frank Miller Batman is just out of range. He used Ice Flash, which is 12-inch range, on the Son of Batman over here, which is just an endurance check. If they fail it, which he passed, he would be frozen. But even if you pass it, you're -1 to defense and -2 move. So currently he's -6 to move. And that basically means he has a movement range of 2. So he's probably not going to do much this turn. He then tried to fire his cryo gun at him, and the attack roll was appalling. He did move and fire, so he was losing a couple of dice. But only 1 normal die actually got through. And that was with the -1 defense for a single point of blood. Oh, and I did forget to mention, with the freezing of that, the first marker goes on Endless Winter. And the third marker for that blood damage there, because his gun has cold on it obviously, goes on Kingdom of Ice. So after shaking off the ice around him, the Son of Batman there activated. He put down a suspect marker and moved a massive 2 inches. It's lucky that he's the one in the front, because he's the only one of those Sons of Batman miniatures that are actually tanky. He's got 6 health, defense 4. He's hanging in there, and to help him hang in there even further, as a resource again, another Tonight We Are the Law was played, so that he could heal 1 more damage. We're back over here because Freeze Thug 1 activated. Without Audacity, he moved up to the frozen enemy suspect marker, and using that free inspired manipulate from Mr. Freeze right there, removed it. And remember, he has cold acclamation, so it doesn't take 2 actions for him. And in doing so, scored Chill Out, revealing enemy frozen suspect marker for 2 points. Green Arrow activated next for the Batman crew, and Cryo Armor is a pretty hard counter to bows and arrows. They're only rate of fire 1 by default, so you're losing the strength die. Nevertheless, he fired his standard triple blood arrow into Freeze Thug 3, I think it is, the one with the gun hands. Got through and hit her for 3 blood. I believe she has 4 or 5 health. The Power Fist wielding Freeze Thug activated next, the one holding the frozen assets for the turn. She moved within her 8, not the full 8 though, through the cryo grenade upgrade she's been purchased at the suspect marker there to freeze it, which put the second marker on Endless Winter. Then for a tactical action, put down a suspect marker, and in doing so scored another Stay Cool for putting a suspect marker within 4 inches of a frozen enemy suspect marker. Also, Carrie Kelly is within 4 of that frozen marker, so a Secure the Perimeter has now been frozen by one of the Ice Age cards. Carrie Kelly, Robin activated, and she ended up where you can see her there at the base of the Ferris wheel, but before she moved, she was outside of 10 inches, that's 8 plus the 2, to put down a suspect marker directly where she started. Actually, I just realised I might have been within 4 of the frozen one there, but it doesn't matter. You can see that she did it once she moved over there, because it doesn't really matter. She put down her suspect marker as the point, and then she used her handyman trait to do reveal, because that gives you another manipulate for free. You don't need to be near the leader or anything, to turn it into loot. So she's just over there doing her own thing, and is now holding on to loot, but this doesn't score until the end of the game, of course. And she also, for a special action, used concealment. So again, you've got to be in base to base to see her. Freeze Thug 4 activated. It's the one with the sword that is devastating cold sharp. Doesn't have the exposure roll, that's just ranged weapons. He activated with Audacity. He moved into base to base with this Son of Batman. He chucked a cryo grenade at his feet, or more so it covered here to be exact. It froze the suspect marker, which in doing so adds another marker to Endless Winter and scores it, because that would be the 3rd marker on it. So that has scored. It also freezes another card, so welcome back to being an Ice Age card. Back to Arkham, so that is frozen again, so there's 2 cards currently frozen. And he attacked with his blood stun sword. He efforted twice. Son of Batman didn't effort at all. All said and done, 3 hits through for 3 blood, 3 stun. With the 1 blood, 1 stun on him, that puts him at 4-4, so he's actually still both alive and conscious. But during his turn, a important research was played. So if after the next friendly or enemy model turn, there's still at least 1 Ice Age card in play, get rid of it, and for the entire game that is, and score for another 3. So we're already at the final activation for the Batman crew. It was the Son of Batman with ranged attacks back here. He didn't have Audacity, but he did start just within 8 of Batman. He moved up to where you can see him, and just outside of 4 inches, barely, like absolutely barely. Put down a suspect marker right there, and that's all he did, because he didn't have Audacity. So she gets to do something, probably murder, well, without Audacity though. Although she will have the Inspire, and the ranged Polar Bear get to do something as well. So of those two, the Freeze Thug backs up and then using that Inspire from her boss put down a suspect marker. However, forgot to cover, important research scored after that Son of Batman didn't remove a frozen suspect marker, so one of the two frozen cards is getting returned to the top of the pile, and one of the Ice Age cards is discarded for the rest of the game. During her turn though, for placing that suspect marker, you'll notice there's an icon on it. That's because another freeze is coming, is put into play, it carries on between turns. Unfortunately it was a 3 on the D3, so that's why there's a 4 on it, although it's immediately coming down to a 3 because the ranged polar bear is activating and he's a friendly. So last activation for Battle Round 2, the ranged polar bear shot without moving or using anything straight into the unconscious Son of Batman. I didn't bother putting any markers on the table because he was dead 6 ways from Sunday. 2 hits got through, which would be 4 blood, 4 stun, plus 2 blood for the 2 hits because he's unconscious, plus another blood because of exposure. He's just dead. And there was a reason for doing that, not just being cruel to the poor man, is because Cold Weapon doing more blood damage. That's the 5th and final marker on, in focus, Kingdom of Ice. So it has scored for 2. So at the end of Battle Round 2, it does really feel like Mr. Freeze's crew is running away with it. If you let them keep doing things, they score very easily. Once there's less suspect markers and they start losing members, I've found that that's when they start to struggle, at least in terms of the one other match I've played as them on an online match versus League of Assassins. But yeah, they seem to be doing well. Now in terms of the cards in play, Frozen Assets scores because the Power Fist Lady held on to them for the turn, so I guess they just melt after that. The Die Hard scores for the Batman crew because Carrie Kelly was uninjured, so that's 2 points, so they kind of cancel each other out. And speaking of cancelling each other out, both crews are playing a Phase 4 card. Another Secure the Perimeter is being played by the Batman crew for 2, and these 2 suspect markers are the ones that are going, obviously, because they're the only 2 by the edge of the table. But presumably prior to that, well, I don't think it matters really. Actually, it does. They both happen simultaneously, because the Mr. Freeze card is send them to the cooler. There are at least 6 models within 4 inches of frozen suspects. Doesn't have to be the same one. So there's a frozen suspect marker there, and there's like 2, 3 models there. She's within 4. Yeah, she's definitely within 4 over there. So that's 4 models. Presumably, again, they score simultaneously, so that one there counts, and then that's many more than 6. So we are saying that's scoring as well. And with that, we can jump into Battle Round 3 with Valuable Commodities still in play for the Batman crew, and a Freeze is coming in play for the Freeze crew. So here we are at the top of the penultimate round, Battle Round 3, and the Mr. Freeze crew, despite the difference in passes not being used, are taking first activation. Almost everybody on the table for the Batman crew has Audacity. The only one who doesn't is the ranged Son of Batman right there. For the Freeze crew, the Cryo Cannon person does not have it, neither does the ranged Polar Bear, or the other Polar Bear for that matter. One card being played, Phase 2 card. It is the other Frozen Assets for the Freeze crew, and once again, Power Fist Lady, she's adjacent to a friendly assessment marker, so she has that on her person. And with that, let's jump in. So the Power Fist wielding Thug activated, walked over here, put down assessment marker, did eventually use her Cryo Grenade upgrade to freeze that as well, just for the fun of it. But more importantly, she put another assessment marker down within 4 of a frozen enemy one, scoring I think the final, Stay Cool, for another 2 victory points. So it was time to test how tough Mr. Freeze is. Batman activated, hopped over the car and initiated Felonious Assault. He spent a power counter on his power armor to give him essentially crushing for the turn. Every successful hit needs 2 blocks to be defended. He efforted full 3 times. Mr. Freeze gets 2 free efforts from the frozen suspect marker up there, so he wasn't needing to spend anything. Double stuns coming through, and again needing 2 dice, although he loses 2 dice to cryo armor, and then essentially he was only gaining 1 from the 3 efforts he gave himself. But he did well with the rolls that did get through, and Mr. Freeze's defense rolls were not great. He's only defense 3, and I think, or 4? No, I think everything is pretty much 3, and that's why cryo armor is so good. Either way though, 8 stun got through. Now that would be enough to knock him out, but Mr. Freeze is desensitized, so he can't be knocked out, but it does mean any other stun damage he takes will be converted to blood damage, and during his turn that does mean he scores for just a 1 point. They must know Bane for doing at least 6 damage. The close ranged Polar Bear was the next activate, however, forgot that Mr. Freeze is also large, so he ignores 1 stun, so he's actually got 1 willpower left. He's at 7 of 8, not 8 of 8. Either way though, he doesn't get knocked out, so it doesn't matter, but just as a matter of note. So the close ranged Polar Bear rather, came down here, put down assessment marker. He's a henchman, so he was inspired, and that also has a counter on it, because that puts in the final, a freeze is coming into play. Speaking of which, the other one just counted down to 1, so if it isn't removed in this next enemy turn, or Batman turn, it will score. So the Batarang wielding Son of Batman activated. He walked around the corner without audacity, but close enough to the man himself that he used his Free Inspire to remove that suspect marker. So that means the first of Freeze is coming that was in play is gone, discarded, does not score. And for revealing that suspect marker, he scores a Comb Through Everything, because I don't think it was frozen. Should have froze that one, and then they wouldn't have been able to do that. Mr. Freeze activated and pulled away from Frank Miller Batman, then as a special action used Ice Flash to try and freeze him. Didn't work, but lowers his defense by 1 and gives him some movement debuffs as previously discussed. He shot his cryo gun at him. Now he's losing 2 dice for moving and firing, and he's losing 2 more because of the medium armor Batman is wearing, his power armor. So only 1 hit got through, and it did 1 blood. But that's okay, because at the start of his activation he put into play another Kingdom of Ice, so all he really wanted to do was do any damage, because his weapon has cold on it. So this is in play, and has 1 of the 5 required to make it score. Oliver Green Arrow activated, and from where he started his turn he used his special action to use Good Aim, so he can move and fire, or fire and move with aim weapons. He fired his once per game Kryptonite Arrow into Freeze Thug 4 here, would have done 4 blood. He lost the strength die instantly to cryo armor, but he's converting it all to stun damage with non-lethal ammo, and with the stun damage he'd already accrued, that was just enough that he has been knocked unconscious. To end his turn, he then walked into base-to-base contact with the cryo cannon wielding Thug there to make it more difficult for him to do anything, because he doesn't have Audacity. So the lady with gun arms, whose Audacity marker should be flipped, missed that. Activated. She is not in base-to-base with Batman, and Batman did not connect to her base. So she was able to ranged attack, and she did so. Blood stun, 4 shots I think, cold, exposure, into the poor Son of Batman there. 4 hits got through for 4 blood, 4 stun, but because of that exposure rule, that's 3 extra blood on top of that. So he is, as we say in the business, a very dead. That also puts a +1 marker on Kingdom of Ice, and at the start of her activation, just to put it in play, because it's exceptionally unlikely this is going to matter at this point, because I don't think any more suspect markers are going to be placed by the Batman crew. Endless Winter is getting put into play, but again, probably won't score. The last standing Son of Batman activated, walked around the corner of the car, and punched the gun-handed lady pretty badly, honestly. Only 1 hit got through for 2 stun, because he has reinforced gloves, but that was enough because she couldn't see him at the start of her activation. That They Won't See Me Coming scored for a massive 1 damage. 1 damage? 1 victory point. It scored for 1 victory point. Fresh out of ammo, the ranged polar bear activated and just charged into Batman. Not literally, because they do have the charge attack, but he didn't have Audacity, so he's just into base-to-base with him. During his turn though, the marker there procced down to 0 next to the other polar bear, which means that the Freeze is Coming has scored. Last activation of the penultimate turn for the Batman crew, Carrie Kelly. She ran up behind that building, and she did actually put down a suspect marker. She's just been a workhorse at this match. She's just been getting stuff done and scoring. She put down a snitch. No one's going to get to that, so it is going to score. Well, with Green Arrow kind of locking down the final Freeze Thug in a manner in which he can't really fire, for his activation he just backed up. He's not doing anything else, and with that it takes us to scoring for the round. So then about round 3, everyone who's conscious has healed 1 stun. The Mr. Freeze Thug is not waking up, so his game is done. We've got cards in play to cover, as well as 1 other card being played. Frozen Assets for Mr. Freeze scores again for 2. And Phase 4 card, another Send Them to the Cooler. The only other one actually, because there's only 2 of them in the deck. There's at least 6 miniatures gathered there, plus there's another one over there. So yeah, 6 models within 4 of Frozen Suspect markers. That scores for 2, and for the Batman crew, the Snitch scores. And with that we can jump into the final turn. Dawn of the final day, the top of the final battle round of the game. Everyone in the Batman crew who's left has Audacity. Everyone in the Mr. Freeze crew does, except the cryo cannon guy who's next to Mr. Freeze. I believe he's the only one without, and the unconscious gentleman, of course. There's 1 card being played as a Phase 2. It has no chance to score. We're just going to look at it because it's fun. It never got drawn prior to now. It's Mr. Freeze's unique card, and it is worth 3. You target 2 scenery elements, then the opponent picks another one. So for instance, because again, it can't score in 1 turn, so there's no point actually putting the markers down. He could say this one, 2 event markers next to it, and the Batmobile. Just say they're Nora research tokens, which you just use event tokens for. A model may manipulate them to move them 4 if you want to keep them away from Mr. Freeze, but when he becomes within contact with one of them, they disappear, and when all of them are gone, you score the card. Ideally, you want this card early, because it carries on between rounds. What's interesting about it, though, is you spend the resource for it while it's in play as an objective, because it gives Mr. Freeze an extra move, which is pretty interesting. It's the first card of this type. So yeah, just looking at it, it's technically in play. It can't score in 1 round, so it's irrelevant, but just taking a look because it's his unique one. With that, let's jump in the Batman crew as priority. Well, if nothing else, we're getting a little bit of action in the final turn. Batman activated. He used the last power counter he had of the 3, because he didn't do anything in turn 2, to do the last power he can do, which is he ignores 2 damage taken per attack. It's similar to when like Bane is on Venom. So anyway, he went into base to base with Mr. Freeze and activated I'm the Surgeon, his unique card. You push all models within 4 up to 4 inches away, although I presume they stop when they hit things, so the polar bear got knocked away a little bit, so did he. They do a simultaneous attack against each other, and if the opponent boss gets knocked out, you score the card. It's not going to score the card, but hey. He efforted 3 times. Mr. Freeze got 2 free efforts from there, plus again his armor takes away 2. 6 stun damage got through, all said and done. However, it's actually 5 because of large, and then he only had 2 stun left, so essentially that wipes that out for all his stun. That remaining 3, however, gets turned into blood damage because he's desensitized. So he has 7 HP, I believe, so he's got 4 HP left. I don't think, like, Green Arrow literally can't hurt him because of a dice he has to lose just to initiate an arrow. So he's probably going to live, but at least that was a fun little fight at the end there. So there isn't much more to be done scoring wise for the Freeze crew, but the one with the Power Fist activated with Audacity, moved next to the frozen suspect marker that had been there, removed it, and scored another chill out for revealing a frozen enemy suspect marker. So upon remembering that Oliver was purchased the reinforced gloves upgrade, he actually just charged in because his bow's no good against Mr. Freeze. Now there's an interesting problem here. He efforted 3 times, basically the exact same situation as Batman, because Mr. Freeze gets the free efforts from the frozen suspect marker there. He did 2 hits through, all said and done, which is 4 stun. That would technically come down to 3 because of his large roll, but the question is, does the large roll still apply, or is all the damage converted to blood first because of desensitized? Which roll kicks in first matters, because he lives if only 3 stun gets converted into blood, but if all of it gets converted into blood, Freeze is actually down, dead. So it matters, and no idea which order it procs, because desensitized just says you're not unconscious, and any stun damage you take is converted to blood, but it doesn't say when. And large says you ignore up to 1 stun damage suffered. So it really matters which one procs first, and no idea. I mean, the Mr. Freeze crew is definitely won, because they basically scored their entire deck, so just for fun, and to avoid any arguments for now, Freeze is down, and that's going to score back to Arkham for 3 points. I think that might be the final card scored from both hands, but we'll see. Yeah, just looking at the situation and the hands of both crews rather, there's no way to score the in-play cards for Mr. Freeze, even if everybody could shoot someone. There's not enough targets, and people with guns with ammo left to do it for Kingdom of Ice. Endless Winter, there's no suspect markers to freeze, or sorry, there is 1 up there, but no one can get to it, and you would need to do 2 more after that. And obviously Mr. Freeze's wouldn't score regardless of whether or not he was dead. So we are just going to go to scoring. The only other card actually being added to the piles is the valuable commodities, because Carrie Kelly is holding on to the loot. With that, let's see how badly Mr. Freeze won by. So here is the 2 piles. However, I did notice there was one more thing that could have happened. Carrie Kelly could have ran right into the corner of the map, put down a snitch. So we'll see if that matters. The taking out Mr. Freeze is worth the same thing, so if that shouldn't score, it kind of balances out, but we'll keep it to one side. Let's see how much Mr. Freeze scored. It's a lot. Let's see. So 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 31, 34. That is a pretty high score, and very indicative of not being able to take out enough of his crew, because once he starts losing people, he just struggles to score cards. At least that's how my online match went. But yeah, that's a pretty high score. It's definitely not going to be topped, regardless of whether or not this card and the other card both count. But hey, let's see. So that's 6, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Actually, 30 on its own, 33 if you count that, but we won't just in case the Batman card shouldn't have scored. Is still, one, it's a really good score for a Batman crew, and two, only 8 behind? Or less than that if that scored as well. That was a very fun match. The Mr. Freeze crew is very, very focused. You need to have suspect markers to play with. Going against a crew that doesn't play them much, so not League of Assassins for instance, who love placing them, organised crime like placing them or working with them. Maybe they'd probably struggle against the Batman Who Laughs, and depending on how much he's relying on Stinky Fish and Snitches. I don't know, but like I say, this is only the first live match with the Freeze crew. I've played one digital match, and in the digital match lost a couple of henchmen about turn 2, and then started to kind of have a decline of having the manpower to do the things I needed to do, like deal freeze damage with cold weapons, and then also have people manipulating suspect markers. Taking the cryo upgrade for some of his henchmen is a must. You need to have multiple people who can freeze suspect markers. That really, really helps with the scoring of cards. But the other thing I found is, as the game goes on, generally speaking, whoever you're against stops laying as many suspect markers. The early game is place, and then you start fighting a little bit, and there's less down. So the Freeze crew has less ability to score the longer the game goes, I think. That's some initial impressions though. We'll definitely see the Mr. Freeze crew again next time. Maybe have Killer Frost helming them just to see how she performs compared to him against some other crew. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Ta for now.